Welcome to another session of Cop Talk. Two Jews give their views on the news, and I am Bob Cohn, the Editor-in-Chief Emeritus of the St. Louis Jewish Light. With me, as always, is Larry Levin, the publisher and CEO of the Jewish Light, and our producer, Mike Sherwin, managing editor of the Light. Larry, as usual, there is no shortage of topics to discuss this week, so we'll plow right into it. Let's begin with what you and I were just talking about before we went on the air. The major story of the past few days, the worldwide terror alert and the temporary closure of 19 U.S. embassies throughout the Middle East, including Israel, as well as 18 Arab countries. The actions are based on a reported intercepted message from the top al-Qaeda leader to the leader of its most active branch in Yemen. What do these events tell us about whether or not al-Qaeda is indeed weakened and demolished since the death of Osama bin Laden, or might even be stronger with branches scattered across the entire region?
Well, we just see a report as we're filming this that a plot to take over the port in Yemen by al-Qaeda has been thwarted. So A, it's incredibly good news, and B, shows that intelligence communities are at least on top of what's going on, and obviously this time they were several weeks in advance. Whether or not this was the sole plot, that was that they were worrying about or not remains to be seen. But there's some reassurance that there was actually a plot foiled as a direct result of these actions.
And I was impressed, with very few exceptions, that most of the congressional people, senators, congressmen on both sides of the aisle, liberal, conservative, supported the president's actions as being prudent and necessary.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about those congressmen as they relate to some of the other issues going on in the world, most notably Israel. So you go ahead with your next question.
I will go with my next question. It is on a totally unrelated topic, but one we're concerned about. We were recently honored by the LGBT community at Pride Week for our role in publishing same-sex marriages and other Simcha types of things. But in two parts of the world, one, Pope Francis I shocked some reporters on the airplane when he said that, asked about a gay priest, he said, if someone is called to Christ, his words, who might be a judge? At the same time the Russian President Vladimir Putin has launched an all-out assault on the LGBT community in Russia, encouraging mobs to set upon gays and lesbians. I mean, what kinds of it's been suggested we might consider a response to the Winter Olympic Games in Russia in 2014. How do you think we should react to such provocations?
In Russia, it's an unmitigated disaster, and just as we're coming up on the Olympics, the Winter Olympics next January, February,
right.
and so far those in leadership positions in LGBT communities and organizations have been fairly diplomatic about what's going on, but as we get closer, it remains to be seen whether or not the environment and the atmosphere is going to make people feel comfortable enough to travel. And then for those of us who support LGBT rights and equal treatment and non-discrimination and non-hate and non-physical violence, whether or not we ought not speak up and say there doesn't serve to be any constructive purpose in folks going to Russia, in the course of this kind of deliberate provocation. Then when you add to that Russia's decided to give a year of asylum to Snowden, and now Obama is saying he's canceled his trip because of of the problems with Russia, it's really getting to be a conflagration.
I think that Putin is more harsh than any Russian or Soviet leader since before Brezhnev.
Yeah, and a lot of it seems to be flexing his muscle for the sake of demonstrating that he can flex his muscle, and especially with his shirt off so that everybody can see him flexing his muscle.
Exactly.
That's right, yeah.
We'll have to monitor that very, very carefully. Last week in Washington, yet another attempt to restart the long-stalled Israeli-Palestinian peace process began, thanks in large part to the dogged and persistent efforts of Secretary of State John Kerry. Why should we be any more optimistic or less pessimistic about this latest round in previous attempts?
Oh, who knows at this point? I mean, whoever thought that we'd be at the point where Bibi Netanyahu is seen as the last best hope for peace? It's crazy. And his party has mostly deserted him on this. And those in the United States who from the right for so long have said, stay out of Israel's business, don't tell them what to do. Now they're meddling because they're saying don't release prisoners, in advance of these talks or as a condition of these talks. So it's a mess. The political background that underlies this is a mess. Still, for John Kerry to have done what he did in such a short period of time, traveling so tirelessly between here and the Middle East, is unbelievable. For him to get people to operate under the cone of silence, as he has so far, is unbelievable. And for him to have gotten them to travel to the United States on such short notice is an incredible accomplishment. So I think the guy has done a tremendous amount of work. I don't buy these articles, and there are a lot of them that say if they don't succeed, things will be worse off than we've been. How could we be worse off than we've been?
Right.
You know, nobody has proposed a constructive third way between a two-state solution and a binational Israel. And unless and until that happens, the alternative that we face with Israeli Jews becoming a minority over time is truly perilous.
I could not agree more strongly. As a matter of fact, Thomas Friedman, the foreign affairs columnist for the New York Times, gives Kerry for the credit of risking failure and of devoting his efforts to this. I think there might be something like pulling a rabbit silently out of a hat, that one day we'll wake up and see that Israeli leaders have agreed to a Palestinian state and just negotiate on the borders. That's my own personal hope. There is no other viable alternative to a two-state solution.
Not so far. And there have been some really bad background noise. I mean, the European Union couldn't have picked a worse time,
right,
to report their regulations, or whatever they call them, about dealing with Israeli companies that do business beyond the Green Line. Just terrible, overreaching. Some of the countries now are saying through back channels that it was actually an unintended overreach, that it was basically bureaucrats who drafted the rules and they didn't mean to go as far as they did, because the implications right now are that if you have a major Israeli corporation that happens to do some business beyond the Green Line into the territories or into the West Bank, that the EU wouldn't do any business with them at all. And you know, that reading is going to cause some real issues. It's also causing Israelis to be concerned because of the big, I forget the name of it, but the big conference and initiative coming up working on scientific exploration, horizons, scientific explorations and research with in tandem with European countries. And if Israel is cut off from that, there'd be real problems, not just for Israel, but for the European community that relishes working in collaboration with Israeli scientists.
I could not agree more strongly on that particular point. And ironically, you know, while people worry about whether a can of green beans that might have been partly grown in disputed territories in the West Bank, here is a big New York Times story that doctors in Israel, near the Syrian border, are now treating the wounded from the Syrian civil war.
Right.
I mean, it's ironic, and I haven't really seen much press about this, but the amount of negative press that is generated by a European Union action. You're also completely correct in calling out, that I think it was Sheldon Adelman, for his heavy-handed intrusion into really meddling in internal Israeli politics.
Yeah, and it wouldn't be so bad but for the fact that it's coming from folks who normally say, don't meddle in Israeli politics.
Exactly, for sure. Only meddle when it's in your own selfish
Right.
best interest to meddle.
Exactly.
Now we wrote about this in this week's Jewish Light, as a matter of fact. The new president in Iran, Hassan Rouhani, has taken office, replacing the rapidly anti-Israel predecessor, Ahmadinejad. While he has toned down some of his predecessor's rhetoric, he's still lashed out against Israel as a wound or a sore in the region. How soon do you think we'll know if his moderation is for real or just a smiley-faced front?
I think really the only way is if they come back to the table on talks and provide verification abilities that haven't been provided before, because we've learned for so long at this point that no words that come out of Iran make any difference about anything whatsoever. Oftentimes the words are used purely to placate the Ayatollahs. They're used to win elections internally. They'll say one thing in English and another thing, to the folks in the country. It's just hard to tell. Is it helpful that the guy has the ability to kind of communicate and offer semantics that are a little more favorable to the West? Maybe. But like you suggested in the course of our discussions about the editorial, if it's just a smokescreen to delay so that they can get further toward construction of nuclear weapons, then it's worse than if you have a plain talker. So we just don't know.
Yeah, and the optimistic part of me would like to believe him when he said that he looks around the region and sees Mubarak in prison, Morsi incommunicado, and Gaddafi dead. So maybe he is saying that he better be a little bit more responsive to the true concerns of the Iranian public than his predecessor.
It would be a good time for him to be. I mean, notwithstanding Assad's gains in Syria recently, he's still a bit on the ropes, and the rebels have had a little bit of incursive success lately.
Yes.
The connectivity between Iran, Syria, and Hezbollah at this point maybe can be hampered a little bit because of the lack of settlement and the terrible atrocities in Syria. So maybe it's the right time to say, we're going to shift our alliances a little because what's been working maybe isn't working as well as it did in the past.
I'm really glad you mentioned the Syrian thing because it literally changes on an hourly basis. The reports up until yesterday, really, that Assad was gaining.
Yeah.
And now rebels have recaptured a major foothold, except that the major rebel group is believed to be associated with Al-Qaeda.
Right.
We're running out of good guys, if there are any left
in
this scenario.
This is why all the accusations coming from President Obama's opponents, to me, were so disingenuous. Not because you have to agree wholeheartedly with the president's position on Syria, but to say so cavalierly, he's wrong not to intervene, let's intervene, and then you start asking the probing questions. How do you intervene? Who do you fund? How do you fund them? What weapons do you give them? I mean, does anybody remember Iran-Contra? I mean, it's not that long ago. So just because there's a terrible atrocity going on and no one denies that, doesn't mean that intervening is going to make things better. It could, in fact, make things worse, and it could create empowerment of another regime down the road that's potentially as bad or worse than Assad's.
Yeah, and I think that's more true now than it might have been a year and a half ago.
Exactly.
And we also have in another part of the region, Senators John McCain and Lindsey Graham visiting Cairo and attempting to encourage the supposedly temporary military leadership to ease up on the Muslim Brotherhood and to perhaps release Mohammed Morsi, the Muslim Brotherhood former president, from his house arrest, and to try to alleviate that situation. And of course, on the line is the $1.5 billion in annual assistance we provide to the Egyptians. Are you comfortable with that funding continuing to flow to Egypt, or should we suspend it at least until we know which direction they're going?
Well, I don't know which question you're asking. If you're asking what's better for America, I think what's better for America is to offer the carrot, to push toward a truly liberal democracy. So I would be cautious about pulling everything out, especially since Egypt is now in very serious, economically frail condition. We remember 2.5, 3 years ago when we were writing about Arab Spring and its origins, and people were saying the end is near, this is the death knell for the Middle East. And you remember David Makovsky came to our Can We Talk, and he said it's way too early to know. Things look really bad now, but we have no idea how things are going to look in 10 years. Well, who would have predicted at that time that Egypt would have gone through this change, then undone their change, now looking for another change, with those who spoke up against the first change and the elections that put the Muslim Brotherhood in charge, saying this didn't really protect all the rest of us. This didn't really speak up on behalf of the entirety of the Egyptian community. And now we're seeing phase 2 only a couple years later. It's truly remarkable. So if we can help to push in the direction of, yes, democratic vote, but democratic vote kind of underscored by equality, civil liberty protection, the civil rights, the nonviolence, the kinds of things that we hope would lead to a more stable and potentially more cooperative Egypt vis-a-vis Israel, I'm all for it.
Let's consider closing with an update, perhaps, on the upcoming Jewish Light 50th Anniversary Gala event that's coming up. Can you fill our viewers and readers in on some of the details?
We're thrilled. We will ask them to be looking for invitations, which will be going out in the middle of this month for our October 6th gala, 5:30 at the Ritz-Carlton. That's a Sunday evening. KSDK's Mike Bush is the MC. We're going to have lots of great stories and video about you, Lois Kaplan, our past presidents. It's going to be very exciting. Almost everybody in our Jewish community knows somebody who's going to be there or honored or thanked profusely for the incredible history of the Jewish light. I think it's going to be a very, very special occasion. So look for your invites in the mail. If for some reason you don't get an invite, we're going to have information in the light every week between now and October 6th.
Fantastic, and I'm excited about being a part of it. And we'll no doubt have another Cop Talk prior to the high holidays, but let's get an advanced best wishes to our readers and viewers for a happy, healthy, and fulfilling New Year 5774. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time.
Okay, cool.
That felt smooth.
Thank you, buddy.
Yes, I appreciate it.
Appreciate it.